In 2018, news outlets began to dig into secret settlements of lawsuits filed by officials in former Governor Susana Martinez administration. They found enough questionable settlement checks drawn on public coffers to prompt a closer look from State Auditor Brian Colon, who calls what he found akin to abuse of power. That's his words. That's where we'll begin this week with a full panel of line regulars who have agreed to dig into the headlines and give their opinions and insights on our chosen topics. Public health consultant Michael Byrd joins us today. Diane Snyder, she's a former state senator. She's with us as well. One of her colleagues in the state's upper chamber, former state senator Dee Dee Feldman, returns. And rounding out our table is the principal of the Garrity Group. That would be Tom Garrity. Good to see you, Tom, as well. Now, Diane, the state auditor said too often only cursory examinations were made of some of these claims before a check was cut into the tunes of millions of dollars. We'll get into some of the details here in a quick second. But just your overall sense of this. How is it possible that almost $5 million worth of settlements could happen in such a short period of time with so little documentation? What's the fundamental problem here?
Because what you're doing is you're negotiating with the person who is filing a claim if you're trying to do a settlement. And I think it depends more on what they're saying and what you're saying, unlike if you were doing a mediation. But so I'm not sure that you're required to have that much. Now, we as citizens, we want to know that.
Right.
We would like that documentation.
That's right.
But I don't think there's anything that says you have to limit it, document it out step by step as to why. But it's also kind of like
Are you comfortable with that? Are you
no,
okay with that
I'm
as a
not
taxpayer?
comfortable with it.
Okay.
I'm just saying I think that's the way it's been conducted over the many, many years.
Gotcha.
I don't think it's just Governor Martinez's settlements. I think if we truly went back, which, by the way, that would have been, a bit of that would have been our current mayor as the auditor. He could have, so anyway, I think there's...
He did.
He did some, but he didn't do as much as he could have. I just think that the main thing is we're bringing it to the forefront.
Right.
We're discussing it. We're looking at it, and I believe this will give the legislature an opportunity to look at the current law, see where do the revisions or tougher segments need to be implemented, and it gives them an opportunity to do it. It's not right, regardless, in my opinion, and that's just it, my opinion. I'm not an attorney, but I would like to know why what the reasoning was, the justification for why you would hand out those kinds of hundreds of thousands and then millions of dollars. And I think the biggest thing that has gotten the public riled up is that so many of them were done right at the end of Governor Martinez's term, and within a few weeks of each other, with what appears to be little to no investigation.
That's right.
What we don't know is what did actually go on. So it would be interesting to have that information as well.
Senator, fundamental transparency situation.
Yes.
The senator's describing here.
Yeah,
I mean, how much
it
does
would
the
be
public
more than
deserve to know?
interesting.
Yeah.
I think that we need to know, given the fact that it's millions of dollars of taxpayer money that has been used for these settlements without investigation, without documentation, and I give real credit to Larry Barker, who really dug into this months ago and looked at the use of contract attorneys to make these settlements, and interviewed extensively the current risk management director, the current head of the GSD, Ken Ortiz, both of whom were powerless in this case because the deed had been done.
Right.
And they are now amongst the officials who are saying, we need to change this. We need more transparency. There should be no non-disclosure agreements that extend to 2022. I think there's a real question as to whether we should have non-disclosure agreements at all, whether they don't just perpetuate bad behavior.
Right.
But a six-month period allows people to appeal if they need to. So to me, there needs to be at least a minimum.
Years. This was years.
No, I know
long.
it's years, but I think we need some.
The proposal, I think, is by Sandaroo.
Right.
Was in his legislation was that it should be, I think, 3 or 6 months, but that the settlement details and the investigation should be disclosed as soon as possible on the Sunshine Portal, and I agree with that.
I think. By the way, quick note: I'm not sure if you can appeal a settlement. I'm not a lawyer,
Well,
certainly, but I
I'm
think
not
there's
either.
something
But
here.
whatever the process of review, et cetera,
Exactly
agreements. But there should be some time period.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. People need a chance to kind of get with the program, as they say. Tom, the idea that what we do know, this is interesting to me, in one of the settlements is that it was towards someone to pay back debt that was owed to other Department of Public Safety folks. That's an amazing thing to put in writing, it seems to me. I mean, I appreciate the transparency.
Yeah,
but it's like,
now we get
wow.
transparency
Right,
on that.
exactly.
I mean, everything else, no transparency, but too much transparency
That's right.
there.
That's right.
You know, it's really a sad, very sad situation, especially when you have some civil rights cases which had been just lingering, you know, where there was, you know, a lot of, evidence, a lot of due diligence, a lot of discussion, waning there for 600 plus days. Colleen Heald, investigative reporter, Albuquerque Journal, was one who raised that. But these settlements were done in less than 200 days with very little scrutiny. And so, it just kind of shows what a mess it is. And so, I'm glad that, the state auditor, Brian Colon, was able to go ahead and, make this one of his items to stand on, so to speak. I think it's some solid work. But also, it's very interesting. He had mentioned that there are 18% of the work that they do is actually only identified by way of the audit, different audits and stuff. The 80% plus are actually generated as a result of news reports, watchdog groups, tip line. And so he said that that's really the main source, of the community looking out for the taxpayer dollars, and not necessarily the findings and audits. So I found that to be a great piece of transparency. People can just call and say, hey, here's something you should look into.
That's pretty transparent. I mean, absolutely. Michael, we should make a point, though. Mr. Colon has been very clear that he's not judging the merits of the claims here. That's not what he's doing. Just to make sure I'm clear on that. Michael Berg, the idea, again, the smell test for the public. Dee Dee kind of put that out there a little bit ago. When you've got secrecy extending out the early 2020s, instead of the usual time frame, it seems like people can make up their own rules here. And the legislature, it seems to me, has to step in here and say, okay, we need to standardize this. I mean, I realize every case is different, but this is a little too different sometimes with some of these things. What's your overall thought on this and how we get out of it?
Well, it's totally unethical. I mean, it just reeks of, it's odious. It reeks. And I thank God for the press, and thank God for the fact that people have whistleblowers or whatever you want to call them, and that there are sometimes the systems. Having been in government, worked in government, I know that sometimes the systems, in fact, do not work in the manner that they were established to. And in those cases, you clearly need to have another vehicle. I guess I'd like to know, where can I get, where's the line form to get some of this?
You want to be able to write a two-paragraph letter and get $200,000 out of it and turn back to Dee Dee on that one. That was one of the cases here.
Yes,
that's amazing, with no documentation as to reasoning at all.
There has to be an investigation.
That's right.
I mean, there has to be an investigation of these claims. They have like a bevy of 50 to 100 lawyers.
Right.
What are they doing if they're not investigating these things? So I think this will be a good case for the Ethics Commission.
Okay.
Our Ethics Commission is
for the new Ethics
coming
Commission,
up, and it has been established, and it will open its doors to claims and complaints the 1st of January. And I think that Brian Colon, our auditor, did say he was going to be taking this to the Ethics Commission because, as Michael said, this is unethical behavior. What a hornet's nest.
Yeah, it really
what
is.
a hornet's nest in the state police department, in the detail around the governor. It's pretty shocking. It's not just a matter of these claims and these settlements, but it's also a matter of, secret tapes.
That's right.
And mooning on the part of the state police chief. I mean, it's shocking.
Well, one of the things that I think really validates, the findings of this, that it's not political, is the fact that the Republican Party came out and they didn't start swinging, saying, "No, you can't say that." They basically said, "You know what? No one is above the law. In addition, it's imperative that any such settlements are never a burden on taxpayers."
Yeah.
And you know,
So,
Mr.
fascinating
Pierce,
response.
that's
you
a
know,
great
Mr.
response.
Pierce and Susanna are not friends, have never been friends, and I wouldn't have expected anything else from him.
Are you
But the-
surprised something was said, though? They could have
Yeah,
just
no,
left it alone.
no. I figured that was exactly what he would say and what was
Okay.
needed.
Okay.
The thing that I find
If you can do it in
interesting.
20 seconds.
Yeah, what's going to happen? Do we convict her? Do we send her to jail? What's the outcome? To me, the best outcome we could get is back to the legislature and doing something more concrete about the process of what needs to be
That's
done.
up to Marco Cerna as
Yes,
far as what those
and
next steps are.
the judge. True,
right.
but that's in my head. What happens?
That's right. We'll see. Next steps are going to be interesting. We'll have to end that discussion there. We'll keep an eye on what the prosecutors do with the audit, if anything. Now, after the break, we are talking redistricting.